Hey friends, Noah from Corporate Streams. Today we're picking a fight with the internet and we're going to be crowning a single camera as today's undisputed best camera of all time. Let's do it.
Be seen, heard, and better understood through virtual gatherings. Elevate your message with Corporate Streams.
I'm gearing up for your comments. I am ready for the slaughter. Go ahead and give me your best cameras in the comments below. I'm going to be talking about a single camera today, but before we get into that, let's talk about a few things like a disclaimer, the specs and the things that we're going to go off to meet that criteria of undisputed best camera of all time, and then what that camera can be used for. First off, here's my disclaimer. This is an unsponsored video that is unfiltered based on the 15 years of experience that I have as a videographer, filmmaker, and now YouTuber, I guess. The true best camera is the one that you shoot with already, the one that fits your needs, but nobody actually likes to hear that answer, right? We want someone to stick a flag in the ground and say, this is the best camera of all time, and challenge the internet to a virtual camera battle based on our unique experience, needs, and situation. Obviously that's flawed. This video is a bit flawed, but hey, we're gonna jump into it anyways because it's gonna be a little bit of fun. But I do believe the camera I've picked out by far checks many of the boxes that we all need as filmmakers. So let's talk about some of the criteria that we're gonna use. Number one, specs. What can this camera do? What can it accomplish? Number two, sensor size. Three, functionality. What can it do? What can it perform? Four, buttons. Does it have the adequate buttons for us to function and do our job as filmmakers? Number five is outputs. Can this be used in a live environment with HDMI, SDI, NDI, or other things like that? Lens selection, because the other half of a camera is the lens. And then finally, probably the most important thing to us is the price. It's gotta be priced right. It's gotta be something that we can attain. So those are my quick criterias. And I know I'm keeping you on the hook there and not telling what the camera is, but it's coming soon. Another question we're asking is what can this camera be used for? And the camera that I chose is a pretty universal camera. It can do live events like weddings, sports, houses of worship, and corporate events. It can do filmmaking like short films, Netflix movies, Disney Plus, and traditional blockbuster films. It can be used as a YouTube camera, used on commercials. It can fit on a gimbal. It can do slow motion at 120 frames a second in 4K. And in some extreme situations, it can do up to 960 frames a second, even though it's not very usable. It can do RAW, 4K, it has 10 and 12-bit recording, though you might need an external recorder for that. It has HDMI, SDI, and a network interface. But again, it's not just about the body, it's also about the lens. And the compatibility of the lenses that this particular camera has outclasses everything else. And to go one step further, it's not just about the camera and the lens, but it's also about the record format and what you can do with that recording. All right, time for the big reveal. Which camera am I talking about? Which camera makes me still excited to this day that fits all those criteria? It is gonna be the Sony FS5, back from 2015. What? A 6-year-old camera? Why am I saying the best camera of all time is 6 years old? Well, it's because it checks all of these boxes. What are some of the specs on this camera? Well, it is a 4K camera that you can upgrade to do RAW. This gives you 12 bits of color depth. It weighs just 3 pounds, so it's nice and light and small. Its sensor is a super 35mm sensor, which is in between APS-C and a full frame sensor. It has plenty of buttons, customizable buttons, and it has all those outputs that we're looking for, SDI, HDMI, and even a network out. One of the best things about the FS5 is its lens selection. So you can pair the FS5 with a Metabones speed booster, which will allow you to use Canon glass, Nikon glass, and even some Panasonic lenses. But for me, it's all about the Sony glass. And my favorite lens to pair with this camera is the Sony 18-110 f4. This is a true parfocal broadcast lens, and it does some trickery within the camera. So basically, as you zoom in or you zoom out, the focus adjusts so it stays parfocal or infocal throughout that whole zoom. That's super critical for live events so that you can zoom in and get a critical focus, make sure your subject's in focus, zoom out and get what you need. Now, I understand this lens is super expensive, $3,500, but you can get it used for about $2,500. And if you can't afford that lens, the 28-135mm is also a really solid lens, which you can also get used for about $1,500. Another great thing about the FS5 is its low light capability. This camera has extended ISO ranges that aren't quite as good as the A7 series, but are pretty freaking solid. Especially if you pair this camera with a Metabones speed booster and the Canon 70-200, you get a 2.0 f-stop. That puts in a lot of light and you get that beautiful shallow depth of field. It's just a really gorgeous image that's really hard to beat. You can plug in this camera into a wall to have power going nonstop. Plus, its batteries can usually last between an hour and a half and 4 hours. That's pretty awesome. I've had a battery last up to 6 hours for a live production when I just fed the video source out of the camera and not recorded internally. So that's pretty cool too. Now, another great thing about the FS5 is its sensor size. Compare this to traditional video cameras or camcorders. Super 35mm sensor is gigantic compared to the 1-inch standard that's out now. If you look at the PW150 and other high-end camcorders, the 1-inch sensor dominates the market. And this is considered a large sensor for that style of camera. If you look back in history, the 2/3 inch sensor dominated, and that was tiny compared to the 1-inch. And then the 1-inch compared to the Super 5 30mm is just leaps and bounds better than what we had before. The only real caveat to that is its shallow depth of field. I know some people complain that with that larger sensor, you're gonna have a harder time finding focus, but in my experience, if you have a good operator and your camera settings are set correctly, you can get some really good focus with these lenses and with these cameras. When you look at the two broadcast lenses that I mentioned before, the 18-110 and the 28-135, they have a through f-stop of 4.0, which is kind of the sweet spot of the lens, and you're generally not chasing focus at an f4.0. Finally, because this camera is 6 years old, you can pick one up used from between $2,000 and $2,200. That is a steal compared to the A7 series and other cameras. Yes, they're small and compact, but having those buttons where you need them, having a professional look, and something I haven't mentioned yet, you get 3 hours of battery life depending on the battery that you have with the FS5. Can you get that with a mirrorless? Not really. What can this camera be used for? Well, I've actually used it for almost every single category that I've mentioned. Weddings, sports, houses of worship, corporate events, filmmaking, YouTube content, commercials. It fits on a gimbal. It can do slow motion. It can do all of these things, which is pretty incredible because most cameras are really good at a few of these things, but not all of these things together. Yes, there is a little bit of a caveat where you'll need an external recorder to go with this camera if you want to do that raw recording, but you can pick up an Atomos Shogun, the original, for about $500 to $600. So if you buy the body used, if you buy the lens and the monitor all used, you can get the full package for about $4,000. Now I know what you're thinking, holy crap, that's a lot of money. Yes, it is. However, if you are a professional gigging and charging for your work, you'll easily make this back. I charge between $300 and $450 depending on the gig and the package that I put together for this camera. And so what's happened is I bought one and then over time I bought a second one and a third and a fourth. And so now I have 4 of these FS5s that I use regularly for projects. And not only have they paid for themselves, but now they're actually making money on top of what I've spent on them. So yes, this video was supposed to be a little bit controversial to start with, but the combination of lens, camera, and the Atomos recorder is almost impossible to beat, especially for the price point. Now, there are a lot of great cameras out there. The A7 III and even the iPhone are really good bang for the buck. However, if you're a professional and you're shooting in front of clients, having the FS5 body paired with that broadcast lens just fits the look and the expectation of what your clients have for a professional who's charging them money to do videography and video work. So I challenge you, do you know of any other camera and lens combo that can outperform the FS5 at this price point? Go ahead and leave your comments below. Thanks for checking this one out. Thanks for bearing with this crazy title. If you want more from Corporate Streams, please do that YouTube thing. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.